Hello YouTube, my name is Zephyr, and in this video I'm going to be covering a topic I have not touched on in a very long time and is long overdue. That's why in this video I'm going to be going over everything I've 3D printed up until this point, and I'm going to be reflecting on how far I've come with my 3D printing journey. And just like all good journeys, my 3D printing story starts with pretty humble beginnings, because my very first thing that I ever 3D printed was this cube. It has the Artillery logo because that's the brand of printer that I use, an Artillery Genius. The printer came with a USB flash drive, with this being the only file on it, so I printed it out and it came out flawlessly. However, other than being my first 3D print, this little cube has a bit more significance to it, because if I flip it around, it has the year that Fry's Electronics closed forever. Why? Because the day I got my 3D printer, I went to Fry's Electronics to buy 3D printing filament. Little did I know that would be the last thing I ever buy from Fry's Electronics, because the very next day, they would end up getting shut down permanently. So just to pay tribute and just to pay respects, I sharpied on the back of my little cube the year that Fry's Electronics closed down forever. Moving on to my first successful 3D print that was not a file that was packed in with a printer. Yes, it was the obligatory benchy boat. If you're getting into 3D printing, chances are you're going to end up printing one of these things in some way, shape, or form at some point. For the longest time, the benchy boat has been the definitive benchmark test for your 3D printer, to where printing one is viewed as a rite of passage. And for me, just like the cube, I also stamped this one with the year that Fry's Electronics closed down. Soon after that though, I got a little too ambitious and a little too confident, because I would try to 3D print a 1/24 scale car with working wheels. And this is it. This is my first ever attempt at trying to 3D print a car. For the wheels, I tried utilizing the Hot Wheels method, where both the wheels and the entire length of the car have holes drilled through them, so that way I can insert a pin, in this case, a cotton swab that I took the swabs off of, and I cut little slits at the end and freight them to hold everything together to try and make working wheels for this car. However, when you try drilling through the middle of a round object, chances are it is not going to go perfectly through the middle. And that's exactly what happened in my case. The wheels are off center, so they do not want to roll, and they just end up rubbing inside the wheel well. The only wheels that really roll on this model are the front ones, just because they're a bit smaller. This car did also print with an interior, so I purposely removed the seats so that way I could paint them, and I glued them back into place. It also did not fully print out the spoiler, it only printed out the center fin, but I actually think it looks cooler this way. It looks like an even crazier concept car. Speaking of concept, if you're wondering what car this is supposed to be, this is actually supposed to be the concept version of the Devil 16. Unfortunately, I did not make any improvements when trying my second attempt at 3D printing a car, because I once again tried using the Hot Wheels method. And for this car, you might say it makes sense, because this is actually supposed to be a Hot Wheels car. This is Slingshot from Hot Wheels. More specifically, this is the version of Slingshot from Hot Wheels Highway 35 World Race. And as you can see, not only did I once again screw up the alignment for the wheels that doesn't allow them to roll properly, but they're also too big to where the wheels just barely fit inside the wheel wells in the first place. However, I would go on to use a traditional paper printer to print out the tampos and the decals for this car, and they just complete the look, and they make this car look exactly how it's supposed to. I would love to revisit this car and potentially make the other variants of it, because there is an all-black variant, which is supposed to be the spy car version of this, and a white and blue version from Acceleracers, which is the sister series to World Race. Speaking of Acceleracers, you can't talk about one iconic Hot Wheels car without talking about arguably the most iconic Hot Wheels car. This is Diora 2. I swear I am just cursed to not have functioning wheels for my 3D printed cars, because I tried switching to toothpicks to be a little bit stronger for my axles, only for the wheels themselves to be the problem this time around. These wheels were designed to actually roll, which is why they have a huge hole in the center of them. However, this hole is too big and too wide for the toothpicks, so they just fall right off. The car does print with tiny little nubs that the wheels are supposed to slot onto. However, I could just never seem to get the tolerances right on my printer no matter what I do. So I will have to revisit this car at a later point and probably print it again in blue so I can make the Highway 35 version. But just like Slingshot, I once again used the paper tampo method to print on all the decals, as well as go around the car with the Sharpie and make it look as movie accurate as possible. This next car is cheating a little bit because it was actually designed to have proper working wheels. And yes, it is broken because I just kept this in my junk drawer for the longest time until I pulled it out to make this video. Something very important that I do want to mention right now is that none of these models in this video are actually my designs, with the only exception being, of course, my channel logo. Everything I've 3D printed up until this point is taken either from Cults 3D, Thingiverse, or SketchUp that I have had to modify to be able to 3D print. And even then, they're still not my designs. Moving on to the next car, and this one does have some significance to it, and there is a reason why I printed this car. If you've been living under a rock and you don't know what this is the iconic Hoonicorn driven by Ken Block, who unfortunately passed away, so I would go on to print this Hoonicorn as my way of paying tribute to the famous race car driver. I did print the wheels separately, but I didn't even attempt to try and make them roll this time around, as I would just glue them straight onto the body so that way they don't roll. Yet another attempt at 3D printing a car, and this time I thought I would be a bit more clever and take some donor wheels from a cheap dollar store toy car and use them for this car. Unfortunately, this method would not end up working out for me either, because while these are real metal axles from a proper toy car, the way I went about it is just super shit, and it does not give the car enough clearance to have proper working wheels. And just like my first 3D printed car, it did not complete the full wing, only printing the bottom section, as this car is supposed to have a full F1 style wing. And the F1 style wing is very important to this car because this is supposed to be the F132 from Need for Speed, made by Beck Customs. Moving away from 3D printed cars for a bit, because I did 3D print a Funko Pop, and as to this day, I still ask myself why. I don't really like Funko Pops. I think they're overrated, and I think they're kinda dumb. But since I'm talking about everything I've 3D printed, I do need to include this guy. This next one is very special because I have never talked about this or revealed this anywhere before. This is my very first ever attempt at trying to 3D print a Transformer. And naturally, my dumbass tried going for the most complicated one to 3D print because it's Omega Supreme. And Omega Supreme is the most parts-formery Transformer there is. Now, I did vaguely hint at this guy's existence when making my original Transformers animated Dirtboss review, and I also said that that is a video you guys are never going to see just because I hate transforming this guy so much, and just by looking at him in this picture, you could probably tell because he is very poorly made. But if you want to see that review, make it known. Let it be known down in the comments that you want to see that video, and I will make it happen because it is long overdue. While not quite a Transformer, it is still a transforming toy because this is the first generation Drago, or Dragonoid, from Bakugan. Now, this guy would have been able to transform into a ball like he's supposed to if it hadn't been for me being incredibly impatient and getting pissed off and just drilling holes larger than they're supposed to, so I could use toothpicks to hold everything together and act as hinges. Keep in mind, I was very inexperienced when it comes to these transforming toys, so I did not know that you're actually supposed to use the small little clothing pins. So with that knowledge, roughly about 2 years later, I would go on to make his arch nemesis. This is Silent Naga. This figure is special because while we did get an official Naga toy, it was just really a crappy repaint of a Dragonoid figure that came packed in with the DS game. This is his screen-accurate appearance, and what he should have looked like if he were to be actually made into toy form. Even though the difference in quality between these two is night and day, I actually really respect that because it allows me to have a visual representation of how far I've come and how far I've improved when it comes to making 3D printed stuff. Plus, you gotta admit, having these two together is just really cool. Going back to 3D printed Transformers, I would try my hand at a print-in-place Transformer, because this is Combitron. He's supposed to be just a generic dude who transforms into a Volkswagen bus, but once you transform him into robot mode, you'll notice he looks very familiar. That's because the head on this guy makes him look a lot like Beachcomber, especially in this color scheme. This figure doesn't have a whole lot of articulation, he just has ball joints in his arms, and remember what I said about my printer just never having the correct tolerance? Well, his left arm just cannot move. The only arm that moves is his right arm. It's finally time I talk about him. I love this figure, and without that video I made about this figure, my channel would not be as popular as it is today, so this little guy is actually kind of important to me. This is Transformers animated Dirtboss, an entirely 3D printable figure that you can 3D print for completely free, made by Brickbot Guy. He can stand on his own, but if you want him to stand on his own two legs, you need to have him staring into the floor because he has a very large backpack that makes him very back heavy. And if you're wondering what he transforms into, he turns into a closed-top forklift, which is actually a really unique alt mode when it comes to Transformers that doesn't get used a whole lot. And now talking about the figure that really helped my channel blow up, the figure you all came here for, this is Transformers animated Marauder Megatron. I made a review on this guy about 3 years ago, and still till this day, it is one of my most highest rated and most viewed videos on this channel. And what's crazy is that it is still like that till this day. If you search up Marauder Megatron on YouTube, guaranteed the first 3 videos that are going to pop up are one TF fan page video where he talks about it for like a minute, followed by my videos. And I know it sounds like I'm trying to toot my own horn, but it is crazy that up until my videos came out, nobody was really talking about these guys. There was a 3D printable Marauder Megatron out there that anyone could 3D print, that you could still 3D print for absolutely free, and only one video existed of it up until I made my review covering the figure in full detail. Moving back to 3D printed cars, this is my personal Grotti X80 Proto from GTA Online. And this is actually one of my most favorite cars in all of GTA, so of course, I would go back and forth with this car numerous times, just tweaking it and fixing it, so I could finally figure out how to get proper working wheels, and in doing so, I accidentally figured out a way to give this car suspension. So that was a happy little accident. I used some spare rafts from previous prints to make the wing for this car. As for my secret as to how I finally got working wheels for this car, I just used a pin, but most importantly, I kept a little ball at the end, so that way it would slot in perfectly to the hole that I drilled into the chassis. I used a lighter to heat up the tip of the pin and pushed it dead into the center of the wheel, guaranteeing that it's nice and aligned and in the center of the wheel, and then I pushed the pin into the chassis of the car, allowing the wheel to roll freely, but accidentally giving it suspension whenever I picked the car up. Here's a tiny Bionicle figure that I 3D printed, and yes, you can actually remove the mask on these guys, and believe it or not, they are also compatible with real Lego. However, that is not the only Bionicle figure I would end up making, because about a year later, I would end up making a full-size Toa figure. And yes, I know he's missing a sword. That's just because I don't know which blade I want to give him. When it comes to 3D printed Bionicles, there are so many to choose from that I just got overwhelmed because they all look cool. But what's especially cool about these 3D printable Bionicle figures is that they are designed to be one-to-one replicas of the OG figures, which means that they are compatible with real Lego and they retain all of the original gimmicks, like the mask swapping gimmick. Since we're talking about replicas and action figures, that serves as a pretty good segue to this. This is a 100% 3D printed replica of the Toy Biz Sam Raimi Spider-Man figure. It's a one-to-one replica of the Spider-Man 2 Toy Biz action figure, complete with all of the articulation and everything that figure had, except it's 100% 3D printed. Another action figure with much less articulation but still cool nonetheless is this power armor from Fallout. Now, I'm not the biggest Fallout buff, so forgive me if I get this wrong, but I want to say that this is either the T60 or the T51 power armor. Staying on theme with Fallout, I also made the Rocket 69, or Cherry Bomb, depending on which game you played. This is 164, and it is a Hot Wheel car. It has wheels tucked underneath that allow it to roll. And we might as well stay on the video game topic, because if you've been with my channel for some time, then it should be no secret that I am a pretty big Cyberpunk fan. So naturally, I wanted to 3D print the Quadra VTEC from Cyberpunk 2077. Using the same method I used for the X80 Proto, I am happy to announce that this car does also have working wheels as well. I 3D printed a life-size replica of one of the most iconic video game weapons of all time, the ray gun from Call of Duty Zombies, a ghost from Destiny, and while not as exciting, I made a battery dispenser for my controller because Xbox absolutely refuses to give us rechargeable controllers. A motorcycle that scales with my Ghost Rider action figure before I made a much better motorcycle for my Ghost Rider action figure. I even made this cool two-tone flame kickstand for the bike that makes it look like it's actually on fire. This tiny bit of track for this tiny little Thomas the Tank Engine train. Custom wheels for my Hot Wheels car compared to what it originally looked like before the wheel swap, and finally compared to the real set of wheels that I was trying to copy. A completely 3D printed replica of O-scale Thomas the Tank Engine, some track, and his carriages Annie and Clarabelle. A 3D printed Unicron in his planet mode that hangs from my ceiling, and no, sadly he does not transform. The last 3D printed car, I promise. This is the Hyundai, or Hyundai, however you want to pronounce it, Envision 74. This is a print-in-place car with working wheels. However, the tolerances on my printer did not allow the wheels to roll, so I had to make some modifications, and now they do. I also had to print out a separate spoiler just because it felt naked without one. The iconic Countach wing on the brand new Lamborghini Countach. Missed opportunity to not have that as an optional extra for the real car, but I don't know, I guess rich people just hate fun. Little wall mounts to hold up my Hot Wheels track underneath my shelf, and wall mounts to hold up my custom lightsaber underneath my other shelf. An unfinished matrix of leadership that I'm taking to TFCon. And believe it or not, but even my tripod that I use for a lot of my videos, even to make this video, is entirely 3D printed. And finally, last but not least, the final two things that I've 3D printed are a subscribe button as well as my channel logo. My channel logo is the only thing that I have not downloaded from anywhere, and it is the only thing that I have 3D modeled all by myself. As for that subscribe button, while it may not be in my design, I still think you should listen to it and subscribe to the channel as it greatly helps out. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment and give it a like, and as always, thank you for watching.